Hi everyone and welcome to our lesson on the Boston Tea Party. This lesson would be geared towards upper elementary students in 4th through 6th grade. So what is the Boston Tea Party anyway? It's not the kind of tea party filled with china cups and treats. On December 16, 1773, American colonists called the Sons of Liberty boarded merchant ships in Boston Harbor disguised as Native Americans. They dumped 342 chests of tea from the ships into the harbor. Now can you see where the name came from? The colonists did this to protest taxes on imports coming to America that the British instilled. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," was born. We can check out this awesome video of Schoolhouse Rock later. Now you might be wondering why this is important and why we'll be learning more about it. The Boston Tea Party caused the British government to instill acts known as the Intolerable Acts, which did things like close Boston Harbor and ended colonists being able to make their own rules in the colonies, which is known as self-governance. It also became one of the events that led to the American Revolution, and several veterans of the Tea Party like Paul Revere and John Hancock went on to lead the revolution. Are you ready to learn more? If so, let's click the ship and keep going.
There were several events that took place leading up to the Boston Tea Party, which pushed the colonists to the point where they felt they needed to do something big in order for their voices to be heard. Some of these events include taxation without representation, or the fact that British Parliament was taxing the colonists for costs of the French and Indian War, and the colonists were not being fairly represented by Parliament. The Indemnity Act in 1767, the Townshend Acts, which occurred later in 1767, and the Tea Act in 1773. In the next 3 slides, these events will be discussed in further detail. The Indemnity Act. One of the biggest imports for the colonists was tea. By the end of the 18th century, it was estimated that they were drinking about 1.2 pounds of tea per year each. At first, Britain wanted to take advantage of the colonists' need for tea and decided to tax the colonists for their tea purchases. The colonists were unhappy about this, and as a result, they began smuggling tea from Dutch and other European markets, thus decreasing Britain's profit tremendously. Parliament was unhappy about this and decided to pass the Indemnity Act in 1767, which removed their tea tax and lowered their costs to be the same as Dutch tea. The Townshend Act. Later in 1767, Parliament placed a new tax on tea. Not only did the Townshend Acts put a tax on tea, but it taxed several other goods as well, including glass, lead, oil, paint, and paper. The colonists were extremely unhappy with these taxes and reacted by boycotting the British goods that they were being taxed on. The boycott worked in their favor to an extent, and in 1770, British Parliament repealed their taxes on all goods except for tea. The Tea Act. In the year 1773, the Tea Act was passed. This granted Britain a total monopoly over tea sales in the colonies. The colonists were infuriated by this and began smuggling tea yet again. They thought that the Tea Act was Britain's way of trying to trick them into supporting previous taxes. In other words, Britain wanted the colonists to be content of the other taxes because they weren't as bad as the tea tax. This tactic angered the colonists, and they continued to smuggle tea from other sources. Unfortunately, when smuggling tea became more expensive for the colonists, they had no choice but to revert back to British tea, which was still far too expensive under the Tea Act. As a result of this, the colonists became increasingly angry and began protesting British tea once again, consequently leading to the Boston Tea Party. If you would like to sign up for a virtual field trip of the Boston Tea Party ships and museum, click the picture at the bottom right of this slide.
As we mentioned earlier, the Boston Tea Party is an important event in history because of the events that it led to. King George, the King of Britain, was livid about the events in Boston. Therefore, he closed the harbor and created the Intolerable Acts. The purpose of the Intolerable Acts was for Britain to regain control of the colonies and to punish the colonists for their crimes. The Intolerable Acts consisted of 4 acts: the Boston Port Act, the Massachusetts Government Act, the Administration of Justice Act, and the Quartering Act. Each act had a very different goal that ultimately would put Britain on top. The Boston Port Act closed the port of Boston until the British East India Company was repaid for all the tea that was sent to the harbor. The Massachusetts Government Act replaced the government in Massachusetts with officials chosen directly by Great Britain. The Administration of Justice Acts say that accused British officials would be tried by a court in Great Britain. This gave them an easier trial. Finally, the Quartering Acts say that colonists by law had to house British soldiers and provide them with food. The British government assumed that the colonists would obey their rules. However, this did not happen. These new laws unified the colonists, and the colonists began to put together the events that led up to the American Revolution. Here is a video that we can check out later that gives us more information about the Intolerable Acts. Before we move on to the closure of our lesson, let's see how well you really know the events that happened during the Boston Tea Party. Click the link on the screen to bring you to a Google slide of the events that happened before, during, and after the Boston Tea Party. Reorganize the events in the order that they happened.
After we have just learned about what the Boston Tea Party is, what events led up to the Boston Tea Party, and how it impacted the events following the Tea Party, let's look at how the Boston Tea Party impacts the world today. The action of throwing the tea overboard into the Boston harbor was meant to show the British and the Parliament that they could no longer use the colonies to their advantage through unjust means. The Boston Tea Party affects our lives today because it played a key role in leading to the American independence. The Boston Tea Party forever changed the USA in many ways. One long-term effect of the Boston Tea Party was that it was one of the sparks that led to the American Revolution, and therefore the creation of the United States of America. The freedoms that the people of the United States have, such as the freedom of speech. One of the main reasons the Boston Tea Party ever took place was to show the British government that the colonies would not stand to let this happen. Another long-term effect of the Boston Tea Party was the effect it had on future rebellions. The act of the Boston Tea Party can still be visited today. In Boston, Massachusetts, they have a museum and ship that is a reenactment of what happened. In addition, there's a reenactment that is done annually. We're going to click this link and watch the most recent one.
December 16, 1773. One of the most important dates in the history of the United States, the Boston Tea Party.
For we will not pay that tax.
The day the colonists took a dramatic stand against British rule. It's the event that sparked the American Revolution, and a day that deserves to be honored every year by every American. On this fateful night, Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty dumped more than 300 crates of tea into the harbor. It was their patriotism that led to the freedom of each and every one of us. Now, we celebrate its importance by reliving the history and experiencing the passion and bravery of our forefathers with the annual reenactment of the Boston Tea Party every year on the 16th of December. On this day, we walk in the footsteps of the Sons of Liberty, starting at the Old South Meeting House, where the meetings were held that ignited the Tea Party. We march down the streets to the beat of the drums and make our way to Griffin's Wharf at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum. Then we board the authentically restored tea ships, break open the tea chests, and dump tea into the harbor with pride and exhilaration, just as the colonists did in 1773. On this day, every American, everyone who cherishes freedom, anyone who loves history, commemorates the United States' unwavering commitment to the freedom of our people, the promise of our Constitution, and our undeniable strength as a nation. we come together to honor the single most important event leading up to the American Revolution, the Boston Tea Party. Join us in making the 16th of December an American holiday.
Is this something any of you would want to go to?
The investigation into the Boston Massacre.
Has any of you ever been there before?
Okay, now that we have just learned everything we need to know about the Boston Tea Party, let's just quickly review. The Boston Tea Party was a protest towards Great Britain from the colonists for unfair taxation and treatment. Like Noelle said, it wasn't made up of china cups and treats. There was an actual purpose to dumping the tea into the harbor. The colonists were angry and they needed to show Britain just how they felt. The Boston Tea Party was very important because it was one of the events that led to the American Revolution. The Boston Tea Party was caused by taxation from Parliament in Britain to the colonists without any representation or say on what they were being taxed on. It was also caused by the Townshend Acts, which placed a tax on imported goods including glass, lead, oil, paint, paper, and tea. And finally, it was caused by the Tea Act of 1773, which placed a tax on all tea imported by the colonists. This was, as they say, the straw that broke the camel's back. As a result of the Boston Tea Party, King George was obviously angry, and he decided to impose the Coercive Acts, which later became known as the Intolerable Acts. These were several laws that were designed to punish the colonists and make them see that it would be King George's way or the highway. But the colonists weren't having it, and they decided to meet in Philadelphia in 1774, which was known as the First Continental Congress. Alright, let's see if you can remember everything we just learned by completing this quick exit ticket. Be sure to take your time and really think about the events and the orders that they happened.